and welcome to Crowvane Manor. Wherever you are, and whatever kind of night it's been, you've come to the right place to slow down. Let the world go quiet for a while. Out here, none of it needs your attention. Many of you return to these rooms night after night, and I'm grateful for that. There's a reason you keep coming back. The stories kept inside these walls aren't quite like the ones you'll hear anywhere else. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. And if these stories stay with you, a like and a subscribe help more than you know. Now get comfortable, breathe slow, and let's open the door together. After 4 years of dating, I thought I knew exactly where we stood. We weren't newly dating. We weren't casually seeing each other. 4 years is a long time to invest in someone. 4 years is long enough to learn each other's habits, histories, dreams, family dynamics, favorite foods, weird quirks, and all the little details that make a person who they are. At least that's what I thought. Looking back, one of the biggest lessons from that relationship was realizing that time alone doesn't create intimacy. You can spend years with someone and still discover they never truly paid attention to you at all. For most of our relationship, I accepted far less than I should have. He traveled frequently, and whenever he was in town, I got only a fraction of his time. If I am being generous, I probably received about 25% of his attention when he was actually around. At the time, I kept telling myself there were reasonable explanations. He was busy. He had commitments. His schedule was complicated. He needed space. I was trying to be understanding. I was trying to be supportive. I was trying to be the low-maintenance girlfriend who didn't make demands. The problem was that no matter how understanding I became, the situation never really changed. Whenever he came back into town, I found myself adjusting my schedule around his. I would make time for him. I would rearrange plans. I would look forward to seeing him. Yet somehow, I always felt like I was competing with everything else in his life. Friends, work, hobbies, random obligations, last-minute plans. There was always something. I wasn't asking for every second of his day. I wasn't asking him to give up his independence. I simply wanted the kind of attention most people would consider normal after 4 years together. But every time I expressed disappointment, it somehow became evidence that I was expecting too much. That was one of his favorite narratives. If I wanted consistency, I was demanding. If I wanted communication, I was needy. If I wanted quality time, I was asking for too much. Over time, I started questioning myself. Maybe I was being unreasonable. Maybe my expectations were too high. Maybe I needed to become more independent. Maybe I needed to stop wanting so much. That's the thing about relationships like that. Eventually, you stop evaluating the relationship and start evaluating yourself. You assume the problem must be you. Then came the book. To this day, it remains one of the strangest gifts I have ever received. At some point during our relationship, he had become interested in Buddhism, not deeply committed to it, not formally practicing, more like someone who had started reading about it and liked talking about the concepts. Officially, he still identified as Christian, but he was exploring Buddhist ideas and occasionally bringing them into conversations. One day, he gave me a Buddhist reader. At first, I thought it was simply a thoughtful gift. I enjoy reading. I enjoy learning. I have always been interested in different philosophies and perspectives. So when he handed me the book, I initially assumed he was sharing something that had been meaningful to him. Then he explained why he was giving it to me, and suddenly, everything became much less flattering. The book was supposed to help me understand detachment, Not because he thought I would find the philosophy interesting. Not because he wanted to discuss spirituality together. Not because he wanted to share something meaningful. He gave it to me because he thought it would teach me to be less demanding. That was his actual point. His interpretation was that if I learned about detachment, I would stop expecting so much from him. I would stop wanting more of his time. I would stop feeling disappointed. I would stop asking for effort. In his mind, the solution wasn't for him to become a better partner. The solution was for me to lower my expectations. Looking back now, it's almost funny. At the time, though, I remember feeling confused. Part of me wanted to be open-minded. Part of me wanted to understand what he was trying to communicate. But another part of me felt strangely insulted, because underneath all the philosophical language was a very simple message. He wasn't saying, let's both learn and grow. He was saying, you should learn how to need less from me. That realization sat with me for a while. The more I thought about it, the stranger it became. Then something happened that completely changed how I viewed the entire situation. During one of our conversations about the book, it became obvious that he knew almost nothing about Buddhism beyond a handful of concepts he had recently discovered. And even those concepts he seemed to misunderstand. The biggest example was detachment itself. He treated detachment as if it meant not caring, as if it meant lowering standards, as if it meant accepting neglect, as if it meant expecting nothing from people. But that's not really what detachment means. Detachment isn't about allowing people to treat you poorly. It isn't about eliminating healthy needs. It isn't about settling for relationships that leave you unhappy. If anything, genuine detachment often involves letting go of unhealthy attachments to situations that aren't serving you. Ironically, if I had fully embraced the concept the way he was describing it, I probably would have broken up with him much sooner. That realization alone was enough to make me question how seriously I should take his advice. Then came the moment that completely changed everything. While discussing Buddhism and spiritual ideas, I mentioned something about my father, and suddenly it became obvious that he didn't know one very basic fact about my family. My dad was a practicing Buddhist, not casually interested, not experimenting, not dabbling, actually practicing, and he had been for years. The moment hit me like a lightning bolt. Not because my father's religion was some enormous secret. It wasn't. And not because I had hidden it. I hadn't. The shocking part was realizing that after 4 years together, this man didn't know something that fundamental about my family. Meanwhile, I knew everything about his. I knew family stories. I knew childhood memories. I knew relationship dynamics. I knew details about relatives. I knew traditions. I knew histories. I knew opinions. I knew the countless little facts that naturally accumulate when you're paying attention to someone you love. But somehow, after 4 years, he didn't know my father's religion. And that's when the entire relationship suddenly looked different. For years, I had focused on the imbalance of time. I thought the problem was that he only gave me 25% of his attention. I thought the problem was scheduling, availability, effort. But in that moment, I realized the problem was much bigger. He wasn't curious about me. Not really. Because curious people ask questions. Curious people remember answers. Curious people pay attention. Curious people collect details. Because they genuinely care about understanding another person. The fact that he didn't know something so basic told me something painful. He wasn't actually interested in learning who I was. He enjoyed having me around. He enjoyed the relationship. He enjoyed my attention. But he wasn't deeply invested in understanding me as a person. That realization explained so much. It explained why conversations often felt one-sided. It explained why I knew his world better than he knew mine. It explained why I constantly felt unseen. And it explained why his gift had missed the mark so spectacularly. Because the book wasn't really about Buddhism. It wasn't really about spirituality. It wasn't really about growth. The book was simply another attempt to convince me that my needs were the problem. The irony was almost unbelievable. He handed a Buddhist text to the daughter of an actual practicing Buddhist, while misunderstanding the concept he was trying to teach. If it had happened in a movie, people would probably say it was too obvious. But real life is often stranger than fiction. Once I saw that dynamic clearly, I couldn't unsee it. I started reviewing the entire relationship through a different lens. How many times had I adjusted myself to accommodate him? How many times had I accepted less than I wanted? How many times had I convinced myself that wanting attention from a long-term partner was somehow unreasonable? How many times had I ignored evidence that the relationship wasn't balanced? The answers weren't pleasant. I realized I had spent years trying to earn something that should have been freely given: interest, attention, curiosity, care. The truth was that someone who genuinely loves you wants to know you. They want to know your stories. They want to know your family. They want to know what shaped you. They remember details because those details matter to them. They don't reach the 4-year mark and discover basic facts about your parents. The more distance I got from the relationship, the clearer everything became. At one point, I might have felt embarrassed about how long I stayed. Now I don't, because every relationship teaches something. This one taught me that being known matters, not just loved. Known. There is a difference. Someone can enjoy your company without truly knowing you. Someone can like what you provide without understanding who you are. Someone can stay in a relationship for years without ever becoming genuinely curious about your inner world. That isn't intimacy. It only looks like intimacy from a distance. Real intimacy requires attention. It requires curiosity. It requires effort. And most importantly, it requires two people who actually want to learn about each other. The funniest part is that he probably thought he was giving me a profound lesson when he handed me that book. He thought he was educating me. He thought he was offering wisdom. Instead, he accidentally gave me one of the most valuable realizations of my life. The book itself wasn't the lesson. He was. Because in that moment, I finally understood that I'd spent 4 years with someone who knew surprisingly little about me. And once I understood that, leaving became much easier. Today, when I think back on the relationship, I don't feel angry. Mostly, I feel grateful. Grateful that I eventually saw the truth. Grateful that I stopped blaming myself for wanting normal levels of attention. Grateful that I learned the difference between being tolerated and being cherished. And most of all, grateful that I walked away before investing even more years into someone who could tell me how to live, how to think, and how to practice detachment, while somehow never learning one of the most basic facts about the person standing right in front of him. That realization alone makes me feel like I truly dodged a bullet. By the time the breakup finally happened, I was already worn down in a way that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't lived through it. I wasn't standing there looking for some dramatic speech or begging for him to fight for us. But I did think there would be at least one moment where he paused and tried to understand what had brought us to this point. I expected him to ask what went wrong or why I was so done, or if there was anything we could do to fix it. Even if the answer was no, I thought he'd at least want to talk about it, like two people who had shared a life and a home. Instead, what I got was something completely different, and it told me more than any apology ever could. When I said I couldn't do it anymore, he didn't ask how it got so bad. He didn't ask what he had missed, what I had been carrying, or why I looked so tired all the time. He didn't ask if I was hurting, or what I needed, or if there was any chance we could rebuild. He skipped right over the emotional part, like it didn't matter, like it wasn't even real. His face didn't look like someone losing a relationship. It looked like someone dealing with an inconvenience. The first thing he asked wasn't about us at all. He asked, in a stressed-out tone, how he was going to get groceries now. Not how he was going to handle being alone. Not how he was going to process losing me, but how he was going to buy food. I remember just staring at him, because for a second, I thought I must have heard him wrong. I was talking about a breakup, about separating our lives, about the end of something that had taken over my whole world, and he was worried about grocery shopping, like I was his personal transportation and meal plan. Then it kept going. He asked how he was supposed to get to job interviews. He started listing the practical issues he thought this would create for him. Like the main tragedy here was the inconvenience he was about to experience. He asked if he could crash on my couch for a few weeks. He asked if I could still take him to run errands. He asked if I could take him to the store, and maybe here and there to other places. And he asked it all in this way that made it sound like I was being selfish for not wanting to keep doing those things. And the part that hit the hardest wasn't just the questions. It was the fact that those were the only questions. It felt like he was showing me, in real time, what role I had been playing in his life the entire time. Not a partner, not someone he was building a future with. I was the person who solved his problems. I was the one who made sure he ate, made sure he got where he needed to go, made sure things didn't fall apart. In that moment, it became painfully clear that he wasn't losing love. He was losing convenience. There was so much context behind all of this that made it even worse, because none of this was new. This wasn't some sudden emergency where he had no time to prepare. He couldn't drive. And we lived in a city where driving isn't optional. It's not one of those places where you can just hop on a train or walk everywhere. You need a car. You need to be able to handle your own transportation. That had been true the entire time we lived together. And during that year, I had tried to help him. I offered to let him practice with my car. I offered more than once. I tried to be supportive and patient about it, because I knew learning to drive can be stressful and scary for some people. But every time he declined, he always had a reason. He didn't want to. He wasn't in the mood. He didn't feel like it. He'd do it later. Later never came. Over time, his refusals stopped feeling like anxiety or hesitation and started feeling like a choice. Because no matter what he said, the outcome was always the same. I was the driver. I was the one managing the logistics, and he was comfortable letting it stay that way. I was the one who had to think ahead. I was the one who couldn't just relax, because if I didn't plan it, it didn't happen. If I didn't pick up groceries, we didn't have food. If I didn't drive us somewhere, we didn't go. If I didn't keep my schedule flexible, his needs didn't get met. It turned our life into something where I was always on, always responsible, always carrying the weight of two adults. So when he asked, during the breakup, how he was supposed to get groceries now, what I heard was, "How are you going to keep taking care of me?" When he asked about job interviews, what I heard was, "How will I keep moving forward without you doing the work I avoided?" When he asked to crash on my couch, what I heard was, "Even though you're breaking up with me, can I still keep access to your comfort, your time, and your space?" He wasn't asking those questions because he didn't know what to do. He was asking because he didn't want to have to learn. The couch question was almost laughable in the worst way, because I had already tried to make this breakup as safe and clean as possible, even though he was the one who had left me feeling drained. I had found a new place to move into right away, with roommates, specifically, so we could have separate spaces to process everything. I wanted to create distance so we could both breathe out our next steps without being stuck in the same home, pretending things were normal. I wasn't doing it to punish him. I was doing it because living together after a breakup can turn toxic fast, and I didn't want that. I wanted us to have room to feel what we needed to feel. And even then, I didn't just walk away and leave him in a crisis. He was unemployed at the time, and I knew if I left and the rent wasn't covered, he could get evicted. I didn't want that on my conscience, so I paid the remaining rent on the lease, so he would have a roof over his head while he figured out his next move. I took on that financial burden because I still had empathy for him as a person. Even when I didn't want to be his partner anymore, I did what I could to make sure he wasn't suddenly thrown into a disaster. So when he asked if he could crash on my couch, it didn't feel like a simple request. It felt like another attempt to pull me back into the caretaker role, as if the relationship ending didn't mean the services ended. It felt like he was trying to negotiate the breakup the way someone negotiates losing a free ride. It wasn't, "I'm scared and I don't know what to do," which might have made me feel something softer. It was more like, "Okay, but how can I still use you while I figure my life out?" Then he asked why I was doing this to him. That question landed like a slap, because it put me in the position of being the villain for choosing my own peace. It made it sound like I was randomly attacking him, like he was the victim of some cruel decision I woke up and made for fun. It erased everything I had been carrying. It erased the months, maybe years, of stress and exhaustion and disappointment. It erased every time I tried to make things work. It erased every time I showed up and did more than my share. It erased all the times I kept going because I thought love meant pushing through. In his mind, none of that mattered. In his mind, the breakup wasn't something that happened because the relationship was broken. The breakup was something that happened because I did it to him. Standing there listening to him, I realized he wasn't looking at me like someone he cared about. He was looking at me like the system he relied on, like the structure he lived inside of, like the person who made the world easier, who carried the invisible work, who turned chaos into order. And now that system was shutting down, and he was panicking because he didn't want to learn how to run his own life. That's why the conversation felt so empty. It wasn't that he didn't have feelings. It was that his feelings were centered around himself, not around what we had shared. His concern wasn't losing me as a person. His concern was losing the benefits. He didn't ask if we could fix it, because he wasn't thinking about love, connection, or growth. He was thinking about access. He was thinking about what he would lose in terms of comfort and convenience. In a strange way, it made the breakup easier because it removed the last bit of doubt. There's a kind of doubt that can haunt you when you end a relationship, especially if you're the one who finally says, enough. You wonder if you're being too harsh. You wonder if you're giving up too soon. You wonder if you should have tried one more time. You wonder if you're the problem. Even when you know you're unhappy, your mind can still play tricks on you. But his reaction made it clear I wasn't imagining things. It made it clear that the dynamic I felt was real. I wasn't crazy for feeling used. I wasn't overreacting when I felt like he leaned on me more than he loved me. I wasn't wrong to feel like I was carrying the relationship alone. Because if someone truly sees you as a partner, even in a breakup, they usually want to understand. Even if they're angry or sad, there's often a moment of reflection. A moment where they ask what went wrong. A moment where they admit they missed something. A moment where they take some ownership. But he didn't go there at all. He treated the breakup like a logistical problem, like a transportation issue. like a scheduling conflict. Like the main tragedy was that his errands were about to become harder. And it wasn't lost on me that this was a man I had offered to help. I didn't want him to be trapped by his inability to drive. I didn't want him to be dependent. I wanted him to have independence. I offered him practice. I offered him support. I offered him time. He didn't take it, because as long as I was there, he didn't need to. My presence made it optional for him to grow up in that area. And he chose the easier path, because the easier path was me. When I replay that moment in my head, I don't remember some big dramatic scene. I remember the dull shock, the way my chest tightened as I realized the conversation wasn't going to be about us. I remember the way I felt suddenly very calm, not because it didn't hurt, but because the truth was undeniable. It was like the final puzzle piece clicked into place. It wasn't just that the relationship wasn't working. It was that we weren't even in the same relationship. I thought we were building a life together, but he thought he had someone to manage his life for him. That's why it solidified everything for me. It confirmed what I had already started to accept deep down. The breakup wasn't just valid, it was necessary. Because I didn't want to spend my life being someone's solution, while my own needs stayed unanswered. I didn't want to keep pouring energy into someone who didn't even seem curious about my pain. I didn't want a future where every hard moment would turn into me taking care of him, while he wondered why I wasn't smiling. So even though that conversation hurt, even though it made me feel unseen in a new way, it also gave me clarity. It made me feel less guilty. It made me feel more grounded in my decision. If he couldn't even ask, in that final moment, how we got there or what I was feeling, then that told me everything I needed to know about how he had viewed me all along. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized something else too. I had already done more than enough. I had already tried to protect him from the consequences of his own choices. I had already paid rent so he wouldn't be evicted. I had already arranged my own move in a way that created space instead of chaos. I had already been considerate, even while ending things. I didn't owe him my couch. I didn't owe him rides. I didn't owe him the continuation of a role that had drained me for so long. That breakup conversation was supposed to be the end of our relationship, but he was still trying to keep the benefits alive. Like he couldn't imagine a version of life where I wasn't there to carry him. And that realization, more than anything, made me certain. I wasn't just leaving a boyfriend, I was stepping out of a caretaker job I never agreed to take on. I was choosing a life where my energy could finally be mine again, where I could stop managing someone else's basic survival and start rebuilding my own peace. In the end, it wasn't the loudness of the breakup that stayed with me. It was the emptiness of his questions, the silence where empathy should have been. The way he made it clear, without meaning to, that he had been depending on me more than he had been loving me. And once I saw it that clearly, there was no going back. For years, I convinced myself that all the comments, complaints, suggestions, and endless attempts to change me were happening because he cared. I thought maybe he was trying to help me become a better version of myself. I thought maybe he just had strong opinions. I thought maybe every relationship involved some amount of compromise and adjustment. What I didn't understand at the time was that compromise and control are two very different things. A loving partner accepts who you are and encourages growth in the areas that matter to you. A controlling partner spends their time trying to redesign you into someone else. The longer I look back on that relationship, the more I realize he never actually wanted me. He wanted the idea of me. He wanted a version of me that existed in his imagination. And because that imaginary woman wasn't real, he spent years trying to force the real woman to become her. Nothing about me was ever quite right. Not completely. Not enough. There was always something that needed fixing. Something that needed changing. Something that needed improvement. At first, the comments seemed small. He liked alternative styles and considered himself part of that scene. I enjoyed some of those things too, but apparently not to the degree he wanted. According to him, I wasn't gaudy enough. Not because I wasn't interested in the aesthetic, not because I completely rejected it, but because I didn't fit his exact vision. There was always some comparison to somebody else, some image, some standard, some ideal. Then there was my hair. My hair wasn't red enough. Not that there was anything wrong with it. Not that I disliked it. It simply didn't match the picture he had created in his head. So comments followed. Suggestions followed. Pressure followed. Always framed as opinions. Always presented as preferences. But after enough years, preferences stop feeling like preferences. They start feeling like inspections. Then came my body. I was fit, I exercised, I took care of myself. Objectively, there was nothing wrong with how I looked. Yet somehow there was still a problem. According to him, I needed to do something about my ankles. Specifically, what he called my cankles. Even typing that word now makes me roll my eyes. Because who looks at someone they supposedly love and decides that the shape of their ankles deserves repeated attention? Apparently, he did. At the time, I laughed it off. I tried to be a good sport. I tried to act like the comments didn't bother me. But the thing about constant criticism is that it accumulates. One comment isn't devastating. 10 comments aren't devastating. Hundreds of comments spread across years. Start to change how you see yourself. You start examining things you never noticed before. You start looking for flaws. You start wondering whether everyone sees you the way they do. And that's exactly how people lose confidence. Not all at once. Little by little, then there were my hobbies. Even those weren't safe. I enjoyed video games. I've always enjoyed video games. But apparently I wasn't enjoying them correctly. Because according to him, I wasn't a real gamer. Why? Because I preferred tycoon games, management games, simulation games, strategy games. I liked building things, planning things, creating things. He preferred first-person shooters. And in his mind, that somehow made his gaming preferences more legitimate than mine. It sounds ridiculous when I say it now. Actually, it was ridiculous then too. But that's how the relationship worked. Everything I liked was somehow slightly inferior. Everything I enjoyed was somehow slightly less authentic. Everything about me needed adjustment. Even my hobbies, even my interests, even the things I did for fun. Nothing escaped evaluation. The deeper issue, though, wasn't the criticism. The deeper issue was that criticism became a tool, a way to keep me chasing approval, a way to keep me focused on improving, rather than questioning the relationship itself. Because if you're constantly trying to become good enough, you don't stop and ask whether the standards are fair in the first place. The most painful part involved intimacy. Looking back, I can see how unhealthy those dynamics were. At the time, I struggled to put it into words. There were moments when I simply wasn't interested. Moments when I wasn't comfortable. Moments when I didn't want to do certain things. That should have been enough. A healthy relationship respects boundaries. A healthy partner understands that no one owes them intimacy. A healthy partner accepts, no, that wasn't my experience. Instead, if I wasn't interested, the pressure started. The arguing, the guilt, the persuasion, the pushing, the attempts to wear me down. The attempts to make me feel responsible for his disappointment. The goal was rarely understanding. The goal was changing my answer. Eventually, it became so exhausting that we opened the marriage. Even now, people sometimes assume opening a marriage automatically means both partners enthusiastically wanted that arrangement. That's not always how it happens. Sometimes people agree to things because they're tired. Tired of fighting, tired of arguing, tired of being pressured, tired of having the same conversation over and over again. Part of me thought it would solve the problem. I thought maybe if he could pursue whatever experiences he wanted elsewhere, he would stop pressuring me. Instead, that wasn't enough either, because what he really wanted wasn't freedom. He wanted participation. He wanted me involved. He wanted me comfortable with situations that I had already made clear I wasn't interested in. Even after opening the marriage, there was still pressure, still expectations, still attempts to push boundaries. That's when I started realizing something important. The issue wasn't compatibility. The issue was control. Because every compromise somehow required movement from my side. Every adjustment involved me changing. Every solution required me becoming someone different. And eventually, after nearly a decade of this, something shifted. I got tired. Not physically, emotionally. I got tired of earning approval. I got tired of defending my interests. I got tired of changing myself. I got tired of shrinking. Most importantly, I got tired of believing that love needed to be earned through obedience. Slowly, I started standing up for myself. I started saying no. I started pushing back. I started expressing opinions without apologizing for them. I started protecting my boundaries. I started prioritizing my own comfort. And almost immediately, his attitude toward me changed. Not because I became cruel. Not because I became unreasonable. Not because I became difficult. I simply stopped being easy to control. That's when one of his favorite complaints appeared. According to him, I wasn't the same woman he fell in love with. I heard that statement many times. At first, it hurt. Then eventually it became funny, because technically he was right. I wasn't the same woman. The woman he met was constantly trying to please everyone. The woman he met tolerated behavior she shouldn't have tolerated. The woman he met sacrificed her comfort to keep the peace. The woman he met accepted criticism as the price of love. That woman slowly disappeared, and thankfully she did, because she was exhausted. The version of me that emerged afterward had boundaries, self-respect, confidence, opinions, standards. And suddenly those qualities became a problem. That realization was one of the most freeing moments of my life, because it finally answered a question I had been struggling with for years. Why did everything get worse whenever I became stronger? The answer was simple. Strength removed his control. For years, I believed he loved me and simply wanted me to improve. Now, I understand something different. He loved the version of me that was easiest to manage. The version that apologized. The version that complied. The version that adjusted herself endlessly. The version that accepted criticism without challenging it. Once that version disappeared, his affection started disappearing too. That told me everything I needed to know. Real love survives growth. Real love survives confidence. Real love survives boundaries. Real love celebrates the person you become. What we had wasn't that. What we had was a relationship built around his desire to shape me into someone else. And the moment I stopped cooperating with the project, he decided I had changed. The truth is that I had changed, thankfully, because becoming a different woman turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. The old version of me would have spent another decade trying to earn his approval. The new version walked away, and that's why I'm finally free. Growing up, I thought I understood what marriage looked like. Not because my parents had a healthy relationship. Quite the opposite. The examples I saw taught me lessons, just not the lessons they were supposed to teach. As a child, you don't always understand the full story. You see pieces of events. You hear fragments of conversations. You notice tension, anger, and sadness. But you don't necessarily understand the deeper reasons behind them until years later. One of the stories that stayed with me involved my parents' divorce. At the time, I didn't fully grasp how cruel it really was. My mother was in the hospital undergoing a hysterectomy. She was already facing a difficult medical situation. Surgery is frightening enough on its own. There is the physical pain, the recovery, the uncertainty, and the emotional impact that comes with losing a part of your body. Most people would expect a spouse to be supportive during a moment like that. Most people would expect kindness, compassion, concern, basic human decency. Instead, while my mother was in the hospital recovering from surgery, my father rubber-banded divorce papers to the door of her apartment. Even writing that sentence still feels surreal. No conversation, no attempt at compassion, no waiting until she recovered. Just divorce papers attached to a door while she was lying in a hospital bed. The situation became even more disturbing as I got older and learned details I hadn't understood at the time. The hysterectomy wasn't simply some unrelated medical event. It stemmed from health complications connected to an STD. An STD my mother didn't even know she had. An STD that had entered her life because my father had been cheating on her. So, when you put all the pieces together, the story becomes almost impossible to comprehend. A woman is hospitalized because of a medical condition connected to an infection she unknowingly received from her cheating husband. While she is recovering from surgery, that same husband serves her divorce papers. There are moments in life that reveal exactly who someone is. That story became one of those moments. As a kid, I couldn't fully process it. As an adult, I understand it much differently. The cruelty wasn't just in the cheating. It wasn't just in the divorce. It was in the complete absence of empathy. It was the willingness to cause maximum damage to someone who was already suffering. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder how much growing up around stories like that affected my understanding of relationships. Because when dysfunction becomes familiar, you don't always recognize warning signs when they show up later in your own life. And unfortunately, I ended up learning that lesson firsthand. Years later, I found myself married to a man who, in his own way, revealed a very similar mindset. Not through identical actions, but through the same underlying belief that relationships existed primarily to serve his wants. When we first got together, I thought we were building a partnership. I thought we were creating a future together. I believed the relationship was based on mutual care and support. That's what most people assume. You don't enter a marriage expecting to discover that your value is being measured against what you can provide materially. At least, I didn't. Over time, though, little things started adding up. There was always a focus on what he wanted, what he needed, what he expected. His priorities seemed to dominate every discussion. If he wanted something, it became urgent. If I needed something, it often became negotiable. At first, I convinced myself that every couple has imbalances sometimes. Nobody is perfect. Relationships require compromise. But eventually, a moment arrived that stripped away all the excuses. He wanted a car, not just any car, a specific car that he had decided he should have. The problem was that he couldn't afford it himself, so naturally, the solution in his mind was for me to buy it. Not help with it, not contribute toward it, buy it for him. When the conversation first started, I genuinely tried to consider the situation. I looked at finances. I ran numbers, I examined budgets, and the conclusion was simple. I couldn't afford it. Not comfortably, not responsibly, not without creating financial problems for myself. So I told him the truth. I explained that the payment was beyond what I could reasonably manage. I wasn't refusing because I didn't care about him. I wasn't refusing because I was selfish. I simply couldn't afford it. I expected disappointment, maybe frustration, perhaps even an argument. What I didn't expect was the response he gave me. The moment I explained that I couldn't make the payments, he looked at me and said something I'll never forget. Then why am I with you if you can't provide what I want? That was it. One sentence, one brutally honest sentence, and suddenly years of confusion disappeared. Because sometimes people accidentally tell you exactly who they are. Sometimes they reveal the entire relationship in a single moment. Up until then, I had still been operating under the assumption that our marriage was built on love. Maybe imperfect love, maybe complicated love, but love. His question destroyed that illusion instantly. Because think about what he was actually saying. He wasn't asking why we were struggling. He wasn't asking how we could solve the problem together. He wasn't asking about alternatives. His question was fundamentally transactional. If you cannot provide what I want, why am I with you? Not who are you? Not how do I feel about you? Not what have we built together? Not what do you mean to me? What can you provide? The more I thought about it, the more horrifying it became. Because that's not how people talk about partners. That's how people talk about products, services, assets. Not human beings. Certainly not spouses. In that moment, I felt something very similar to what I imagine my mother must have felt years earlier. The sudden realization that the relationship wasn't what you thought it was. The realization that the person standing in front of you views the relationship through a completely different lens. The realization that loyalty, sacrifice, and love are not being measured on the same scale. I remember sitting there stunned. Part of me wanted to argue. Part of me wanted to explain why his statement was hurtful. Part of me wanted him to take it back. But another part of me was quietly paying attention. Because sometimes the most important thing you can do is listen when someone reveals themselves. And he had just revealed a lot. Looking back now, I don't think the car was ever really about transportation. The car simply exposed a deeper truth. His commitment was conditional. His affection was conditional. His investment in the relationship was conditional. As long as he was getting what he wanted, everything was fine. The moment he wasn't, the entire relationship became negotiable. That realization changed everything. I started seeing old situations differently. Old arguments, old expectations, old disappointments. Suddenly, they all fit together. The relationship had never been a partnership in the way I imagined. It had been an arrangement where my value was closely tied to what I could provide. Once I stopped providing enough, my value decreased. It's a painful thing to realize. But it's also strangely freeing. Because once you understand the truth, you stop blaming yourself. You stop wondering why your efforts weren't enough. You stop trying to earn love that was never unconditional in the first place. The older I get, the more I understand that healthy relationships aren't built around transactions. Of course, partners help each other. Of course, they support each other financially, emotionally, and practically. But the foundation isn't supposed to be, what can you buy for me? The foundation is supposed to be, who are we together? My boss failed that test with my mother. My ex-husband failed that test with me. Both situations looked different on the surface. One involved infidelity and cruelty surrounding a medical crisis. The other involved financial expectations and emotional manipulation. But underneath both stories was the same ugly belief that other people exist primarily to meet your needs. That relationships are valuable only when you're receiving something from them. That loyalty is less important than personal gain. I spent a long time wondering why certain moments stayed with me so vividly. Now I know. Because those moments weren't really about divorce papers. They weren't really about cars. They were moments when the masks slipped. Moments when people stopped pretending. Moments when they revealed exactly how they viewed the people who loved them. And painful as those realizations were, I'm grateful for them now. Because once someone asks, why am I with you if you can't provide what I want? There really isn't much left to misunderstand. The answer becomes clear. The relationship was never about love in the way you believed it was. And once you see that truth, walking away becomes much easier than staying. I used to date this guy for a while, and when we broke up, I eventually moved on and started seeing someone else. A couple of months passed, and out of nowhere, he reached out and asked if I wanted to grab coffee as friends. He made it sound casual and harmless, like he just wanted to talk and clear the air. Part of me was cautious, because I hadn't forgotten why I ended things in the first place. I didn't break up with him because of some small misunderstanding. I broke up with him because he had said toxic things that stuck with me. He would compare me to other girls he used to like. Like I was being measured against people from his past, and he once told me he could never fall in love with me. Those weren't comments you just shrug off. They were the kind of words that make you feel small, like you're not enough, like you're just a temporary option. Still, when he asked to meet, he framed it like he wanted to apologize, and I thought maybe he had actually reflected on what he did. I figured, if nothing else, maybe it would bring some closure and let me leave the whole thing behind with a calmer heart. We met up at a pub instead of a coffee shop, which already gave it a slightly different vibe. But I didn't think too much of it. We sat down with our drinks and started talking like two people who knew each other well, but weren't sure what they were anymore. The conversation bounced between random topics, memories, and general catching up. At times, it felt almost normal, and I started thinking maybe he genuinely meant what he said about wanting to talk as friends and take responsibility for how he had treated me. He did bring up apologizing, and he seemed like he was trying to be polite, like he wanted to show he'd grown. Then at some point, one of us mentioned a mutual friend, a girl we both knew. She had a new boyfriend, and it came up naturally in the conversation. This particular detail mattered because he used to have a crush on her. I wasn't trying to trap him or anything, but I asked him something I thought was pretty normal. I asked how he felt about being friends with her now, since he used to like her and she was with someone else. I thought it was just an interesting little relationship question, the kind you ask when you're talking about growth and moving on. He shrugged and said he was fine with it. Then he added that it didn't matter anyway, because the situation with me was different. That caught my attention right away. I asked him what he meant. How was it different? And without hesitation, like it was the most obvious thing in the world, he said, well, she isn't single anymore. For a second, I just sat there, because I genuinely thought he already knew I wasn't single either. In my head, this whole as friends coffee meetup made even more sense if he knew I had moved on. So I responded honestly and said, well, neither am I. I didn't say it to provoke him. I wasn't trying to be smug or rub it in. I was just stating a fact. And I assumed he'd be like, oh, right, yeah, of course. And then we'd keep talking normally. But his reaction was so dramatic that it almost didn't feel real. He immediately stood up, slammed his coffee down on the table, and yelled, well, why did I come here then? The irony was almost painful, because he was the one who asked me to meet. He was the one who said it was just coffee as friends, to talk and apologize. Yet the second he found out I wasn't available to him anymore, he acted like I had tricked him by showing up. He didn't calmly ask, wait, you're dating someone? He didn't say, "Oh, I didn't realize." He didn't even try to save face. He just exploded, made a scene, and stormed out like a child who didn't get what he wanted. I sat there for a moment, feeling this mix of embarrassment, disbelief, and this strange kind of clarity. It wasn't even heartbreak, because at that point I was already past wanting him back. It was more like, wow, so that's what this was. Not a friendship conversation, not an apology, not closure. He only wanted access to me if I was still available, and the second I wasn't, he couldn't even pretend to treat me with basic respect. And then something almost comical happened that made the whole moment feel like the universe was trying to balance the energy. While I was sitting there processing what just happened, another mutual friend happened to be walking by the pub. They saw the scene, saw me sitting there alone, and came inside to check on me. Instead of me sitting there awkwardly by myself after being yelled at, they joined me, and we ended up hanging out. We talked, we laughed, and the night got rescued in this unexpected way. That part honestly made me smile later, because it felt like a reminder that I wasn't the one who should feel ashamed. His behavior was his problem, not mine. But the real takeaway hit me hard, and it stayed with me. That moment showed me something I wish more people understood early. Some guys don't actually like you as a person. They like the idea of having you. They like the attention, validation, the comfort, the benefits of you being in their orbit. They like the option of you. But they don't respect you, and they don't care about you in a real human way. Because if they did, they would still be able to treat you kindly, even when you are not theirs. They would still value your presence as a person, not just as a potential girlfriend. And his reaction made it painfully obvious that he didn't come to apologize because he cared about how he hurt me. He came because he wanted to see if he still had a chance. He came to check if I was still sitting on the shelf waiting for him. He came because, in his mind, if I was single, maybe he could pull me back in and feel powerful again. When he realized I had moved on, he didn't just feel disappointed. He felt entitled, like he had been owed something just because he showed up. That's when my learning became crystal clear. If a guy says he wants to date you, but doesn't want anything else to do with you, he does not like you. Because liking someone includes basic respect. It includes seeing their humanity even when you can't have them. It includes caring about their well-being, not just your own ego. A person who likes you doesn't throw a tantrum because you're not available. They don't yell at you in public like you committed some crime by living your life. They don't pretend they want friendship when what they really want is access. That pub moment turned into this weird little life lesson for me. It was embarrassing in the moment, sure, but afterward it felt like confirmation that I made the right decision when I broke up with him. He had already shown me who he was when he compared me to other girls and told me he could never fall in love with me. And then he showed me again, when he couldn't even sit through a simple conversation, once he realized I wasn't single. So in the end, I got what I actually needed from that meeting, just not the way he planned. I got proof that the apology wasn't the point, proof that the as friends thing was a mask, proof that he wasn't someone who valued me. And once you see that kind of truth so clearly, it becomes a lot easier to stop questioning yourself and start trusting your own instincts. I'm South Asian, and my ex-husband was South Asian too. Although we came from different countries and slightly different cultural backgrounds. When we first got together, I thought those differences would make our relationship more interesting. We understood many of the same cultural expectations, family dynamics, and experiences, while still bringing different perspectives to the table. What I didn't realize at first was how deeply insecure he was. At the beginning of the relationship, I mistook a lot of his behavior for protectiveness. Looking back now, I can see that what I thought was concern was often insecurity. What I thought was affection was frequently possessiveness. And what I thought were occasional moments of jealousy eventually became a pattern that touched almost every part of my life. No matter what I did, he seemed convinced that another man was waiting around the corner. If I mentioned a male friend, questions followed. If I worked closely with a male colleague, questions followed. If I laughed at something a man said, questions followed. If a male acquaintance sent me a message, questions followed. It was exhausting. The strange thing was that I had never given him a reason to distrust me. I wasn't hiding conversations. I wasn't being secretive. I wasn't flirting with other people. I was simply existing in a world where men and women sometimes work together, study together, and become friends. Yet somehow every interaction became suspicious in his mind. At first I tried to reassure him. I answered questions. I explained situations. I offered transparency. I thought if he understood the context, he would relax. Instead, it seemed like every reassurance only created new things for him to worry about. The goalposts constantly moved. And nowhere was that more obvious than during graduate school. At the time, I was working toward my doctorate. Anyone who has gone through a doctoral program knows how demanding it can be. Long hours, research projects, deadlines, collaborations, presentations, experiments, and endless problem solving become part of daily life. Collaboration is not optional in many academic environments. It's part of the process. One of the people I worked closely with was a student from another lab. He happened to be a white man. He was smart, easy to work with, and genuinely helpful when it came to research. We worked well together professionally, which made life easier because graduate school is stressful enough without difficult working relationships. Our interactions were exactly what you would expect between two academics collaborating on projects. Research discussions, lab conversations, data analysis, problem solving, occasional brainstorming, nothing remotely inappropriate, nothing flirtatious, nothing secretive. Outside of work, our communication was almost non-existent. Every now and then, one of us would send a science meme, maybe a joke about research, maybe something related to graduate student life. That was it. No emotional intimacy, no hidden relationship, no secret feelings, no drama. Adding to the absurdity, he had been with the same girlfriend for years. They were happy together, and everyone around them knew it. There was absolutely nothing suspicious about our friendship. But in my husband's mind, the facts rarely mattered. His insecurity created its own reality. One day I got dressed for school like I always did. I put on a skirt. Nothing outrageous, nothing inappropriate, nothing designed to attract attention. Just a skirt. I felt good that day. Not because I was trying to impress anyone. Not because I was seeking validation. Simply because sometimes people enjoy looking nice. There doesn't need to be a deeper reason. Sometimes you put effort into your appearance because it makes you feel confident. Sometimes you enjoy expressing yourself. Sometimes you just like an outfit. That should have been the end of the story. Instead, it became another opportunity for him to reveal what he really thought. When he saw what I was wearing, he immediately decided the skirt was too short. That wasn't surprising. He often had opinions about my clothing. What surprised me was what he said next. Without hesitation, he looked at me and said, "None of those white men are going to think your dark skin and short legs are attractive. Don't bother looking nice." Even now, years later, I can remember the exact feeling that washed over me. It wasn't just hurt, it was disbelief. Because the comment wasn't simply criticism, it was layered. There was jealousy in it. There was insecurity in it. There was resentment in it. And underneath all of that was something even uglier: contempt. The statement revealed so much about how he viewed both me and himself. First, there was the assumption that the only reason I could possibly want to look nice was for male attention. Not for myself. Not because I liked the outfit. Not because I wanted to feel confident. According to him, my appearance had to be connected to other men, specifically white men. Then there was the insult itself, the deliberate attack on my appearance, my skin, my body. Features that had absolutely nothing to do with the conversation. Features he specifically selected because he thought they would hurt. That part stayed with me for a long time, not because I believed him, but because of how intentional it felt. People sometimes say cruel things in anger. This wasn't that. This felt calculated. He wanted to diminish me. He wanted to make me feel unattractive. He wanted me to question myself. Most importantly, he wanted me to stop believing that other people might see value in me. At the time, I didn't fully understand why. Years later, I think I do. The comment was never really about me. It was about him. People who are secure in themselves don't usually need to tear down the people they love. People who are confident don't spend their energy convincing their partners that they're undesirable. People who feel good about themselves don't need to shrink someone else. He was deeply insecure, painfully insecure. The irony is that his comment revealed his fears more than my flaws. Looking back, I honestly think he hated himself far more than he hated me. He carried around so much insecurity that it spilled into every aspect of our relationship. Every male friend became a threat. Every interaction became suspicious. Every compliment I received became something he needed to undermine. Every achievement became something he struggled to celebrate. But while I can acknowledge that his insecurity likely came from his own unhappiness, that doesn't erase the impact it had on me. Because insecurity may explain behavior, it doesn't excuse it. At some point, intentions stop mattering as much as outcomes. And the outcome was that I spent years with someone who repeatedly tried to make me smaller. Someone who wanted me to doubt myself. Someone who wanted me to believe I wasn't attractive enough, interesting enough, or desirable enough for anyone else. That's not love. That's control disguised as insecurity. The funny thing is that reality eventually proved him wrong in every possible way. After that relationship ended, I started rebuilding my confidence, slowly at first, then more completely. I met different people. I dated again. Some of those men were white, some weren't. Some came from completely different backgrounds than mine. Others shared parts of my culture. And do you know what I discovered? Normal, healthy people don't spend their time trying to convince you that you're unattractive. They don't need to. Secure people aren't threatened by your confidence. They aren't terrified of other people finding you beautiful. In fact, they're often happy when you feel good about yourself. The most ironic part of all is that after leaving him, I ended up modeling. Not because I was trying to prove him wrong. Not because I needed revenge. It simply happened as life moved forward. And every time I think about that comment now, I almost laugh. The man who told me that no one would find my dark skin attractive was completely wrong. The man who mocked my appearance was completely wrong. The man who wanted me to believe I wasn't desirable was completely wrong. More importantly, he was wrong because beauty was never the issue. The issue was that he couldn't stand the possibility that I might eventually realize my worth. Because once you realize your worth, people who benefit from your insecurity lose their power. That is exactly what happened. Today, when I think back on that moment, I don't feel ashamed. I don't feel embarrassed. And I certainly don't feel unattractive. What I feel is gratitude. Gratitude that I eventually saw the comment for what it really was. Not an accurate assessment of me, not a reflection of reality. Just the voice of an insecure man desperately trying to make someone else feel as small as he felt inside. He wanted me to believe that my dark skin and short legs made me undesirable. Life has given me plenty of evidence to the contrary. But more importantly, I no longer need anyone else's validation to know my own value. That may be the biggest difference between who I was then and who I am now. Back then, I wondered if his words were true. Now I know they never had anything to do with me at all. Forgive me for stepping in for just a moment. If you've only recently found your way here, then welcome. I'm glad you came. If these stories are keeping you company tonight, consider subscribing to Crowvane Manor. New stories arrive here often, the kind that stay with you long after the night is over. And if you tap the bell, you won't have to go looking. The next one will find you on its own. Thank you for being here. Now, let's return to where we left off. Looking back now, I think one of the hardest things to explain about my second husband is that he never seemed to understand what being married actually meant. We were husband and wife, at least on paper. We lived together, built a life together, shared responsibilities, shared memories, shared years of our lives. But somehow, despite all of that, he never seemed to see me as family. Not really. And for a long time, I couldn't quite put my finger on why. I felt so alone in that marriage. There were plenty of obvious problems. He could be cruel. He could be controlling. He could be violent. There were many reasons I should have left. Yet for some reason, I stayed. People often assume leaving an unhealthy relationship is simple. They imagine that once enough bad things happen, you automatically walk away. Life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes you become trapped in patterns. Sometimes your confidence slowly disappears. Sometimes the relationship becomes your normal, even when it's unhealthy. And sometimes the thing that finally sets you free isn't the worst thing that happened. It's the thing that finally makes everything clear. For me, that clarity came from something that sounds almost small compared to everything else. It came from realizing that no matter what happened, I would never truly be considered family in his eyes. I loved his grandmother. Everyone called her Nan, and she was one of those people who made you feel welcome from the very beginning. She was warm, kind, and easy to love. When she passed away, I was genuinely heartbroken. Not because I was obligated to be. Not because she was my husband's grandmother. Because I truly loved her. Like many families do after a death, everyone gathered at her home. Family members were arriving. Friends were stopping by. People were sharing stories, comforting one another, making tea, and trying to navigate the sadness that comes with losing someone important. The house was full. People moved between rooms. Conversations happened in small groups. Some people cried. Others laughed while sharing memories. It was one of those moments where everyone comes together to support each other. Or at least that's how it should have felt. At some point, my husband walked toward the kitchen. Several family members were gathered there. Naturally, I started following him. Then he stopped me. He told me to go sit in the living room. I remember being confused. I asked why. And he told me that the kitchen was for family only. Family only. Even now, those words sting. Not because of the room itself. I didn't care about standing in the kitchen. I cared about what the statement meant. I was his wife. His wife. Yet somehow, I was being informed that I wasn't family. I remember standing there feeling embarrassed. Humiliated, really. Nobody else had said anything. Nobody else had excluded me. In fact, Most of his relatives treated me kindly, but my husband had decided I'd draw a line, and he placed me on the wrong side of it. At the time, I tried to brush it off. I told myself maybe he was stressed. Maybe grief was affecting him. Maybe he hadn't thought about how hurtful it sounded. That's what I always did. I made excuses. I softened things. I looked for explanations. The problem was that it wasn't an isolated incident. 6 months later, his mother died. That loss devastated me, too. His mother and I had a wonderful relationship. I genuinely loved her. She had treated me like family far more often than her son ever did. Losing her hurt. The funeral arrangements followed traditional family customs. His father, being the eldest son in his generation, sat in the first funeral car. His mother, as his wife, was included there as well. The arrangements made sense. Nobody was questioning them. But when it came time to organize everyone else, I found myself placed in a different vehicle. Not with my husband, not alongside him as his wife. I was put in the car with the children of the family. Again, it wasn't necessarily the seating arrangement itself that hurt. It was the symbolism, the feeling. The repeated reminder that I somehow occupied a strange space where I was married enough to share responsibilities, but never quite family enough to be treated like family. Every time something like this happened, I felt myself becoming smaller, more invisible, more disconnected from the marriage. Then came the argument that finally broke everything open. We were having a disagreement at a family gathering. Like most couples, we occasionally argued. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was what happened next. His sister decided to get involved. Nobody had asked her to. Nobody needed a mediator. Yet suddenly she inserted herself directly into the disagreement. Instead of telling her to stay out of it, my husband immediately took her side. Not because she was right. Not because she understood the situation. Because she was family, that was the message. Loud and clear. Family came first, and I wasn't included in that category. I remember trying desperately to make him understand why this hurt. I gave him what I thought was the perfect example. I asked him to imagine his own parents having an argument. Then I asked him what would happen if his aunt, his father's sister, jumped into the middle of it. His answer came immediately. He said his father would have told her to mind her own business. Maybe not in such polite words, but the meaning was obvious. His father would have defended his marriage. His father would have prioritized his wife. His father would have drawn a boundary. The moment he said that, I remembered gesturing with my hands and looking at him as if to say, exactly. I thought he would finally understand. I thought the connection would click. I thought he would see that he had just answered his own question, but somehow he didn't. The point completely missed him. I explained it again, and again, and again. I tried different words, different examples, different approaches. Nothing worked. It was like talking to a wall. No matter how clearly I explained that marriage is supposed to create a family, unit he simply could not grasp it, or maybe he didn't want to. Looking back now, I suspect it was the second one, because understanding would have required him to change. Understanding would have required him to acknowledge that he had failed as a husband. Understanding would have required him to choose me sometimes, and that was something he never seemed willing to do. Ironically, his sister's interference became the thing that finally freed me. She got involved. She lied about something. She created conflict. At the time, it was incredibly painful, but it also forced me to see the truth. For years, I had been fighting for a place in a family where I would never truly belong. Not because his relatives rejected me. Many of them didn't. The problem was him. He refused to see me as family. He refused to place our marriage first. He refused to understand that when you marry someone, they become your immediate family. Everyone else moves into a different category. Not less important, just different. That's how healthy marriages work. The spouse becomes your chosen family, your primary family, your partner. He never understood that. And eventually, I realized he never would. The hardest truth to admit is that all of these examples weren't actually the biggest problem. The biggest problem was the violence. Because yes, he was violent. For years I minimized it. For years I tried to survive it. For years, I stayed despite things that should have sent me running. People often ask why someone stays in a violent relationship. The answer is rarely simple. Fear, hope, confusion, manipulation, habit, love, trauma. All of those things become tangled together until leaving feels impossible. That's how it felt for me. I knew things were wrong. I knew I wasn't happy. I knew I deserved better. Yet somehow, I couldn't make myself leave until I could. And strangely enough, it wasn't the violence that finally broke the spell. It was the realization that I would never be family to him. That realization cracked something open. It exposed the entire foundation of the marriage. I stopped seeing isolated incidents. I started seeing a pattern. A husband who never truly viewed his wife as his family. A husband who always placed everyone else ahead of her. A husband who expected loyalty without offering it in return. Once I saw that pattern clearly, something inside me finally let go. It's difficult to explain. It felt like waking up, like stepping out of a fog, like being released from a kind of madness I hadn't realized I was trapped inside. Suddenly leaving became possible. Not easy, but possible. Today, I look back at that period of my life with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. Sadness for the years I lost. Sadness for the woman I was back then. Sadness for how hard I worked to earn something that should have been freely given. But gratitude, too. Gratitude that I eventually escaped. Gratitude that I finally saw the truth. And strangely enough, gratitude for the event that forced me to see it. Because what felt like betrayal at the time ended up becoming freedom. For years, I thought I was fighting to save a marriage. In reality, I was fighting to stay inside a situation that was slowly destroying me. The day I finally stopped fighting was the day I got my life back. And no matter how painful the journey was, I will always be grateful for that. Looking back, I wish I could say that moment came completely out of nowhere. I wish I could say it was shocking. I wish I could say there had been no warning signs. But the truth is, I had probably known something was wrong for a very long time. I just didn't want to admit it. That's the difficult thing about relationships that slowly become unhealthy. Rarely does someone wake up one morning and suddenly transform into a cruel person. More often, the problems arrive in small pieces. A dismissive comment here, an unnecessary criticism there, a joke that feels a little too personal, a moment where you feel hurt, but convince yourself you're being sensitive. You explain things away, you make excuses, you focus on the good moments. You remember the person you fell in love with and tell yourself that version of them is still there, somewhere. I did that for years. For years, I accepted things that I shouldn't have accepted. I tolerated comments that chipped away at my confidence. I ignored feelings that were trying to warn me. I convinced myself that if I was more patient, more understanding, more supportive, things would eventually get better. Instead, things slowly got worse. The strange part is that the moment everything finally became clear wasn't during some huge fight. There was no dramatic betrayal, no screaming match, no shocking revelation. It happened during an ordinary afternoon walk, the kind of moment that should have been completely forgettable. We were walking my dog. The weather was nice. Nothing unusual was happening. He had recently gotten home from the hospital after work and was talking about his day. Like many healthcare workers, he often shared stories about work. Not specific confidential details, obviously, but stories about difficult cases, stressful situations, co-workers, and the general chaos that came with the job. I listened. That was something I had always done. I listened to his stories. I listened to his frustrations. I listened to his accomplishments. I listened to his worries. I listened because I cared. That day was no different. As we walked, he talked about his patients and everything that had happened during his shift. And as had become increasingly common, he also talked about another woman. The woman he had repeatedly assured me wasn't a problem. The woman I supposedly had nothing to worry about. The woman who somehow found her way into conversations far more often than seemed normal. At the time, I was already uncomfortable about it. Deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Every instinct I had told me there was more going on than he was admitting. But whenever I expressed concern, he dismissed it. I was overthinking. I was being insecure. I was imagining things. She was just a friend. Just a coworker. Just someone he happened to talk about constantly. Of course, looking back now, I know my instincts were right. But during that walk, I was still trying to trust him. So I listened as he talked about his day. I listened as he talked about work. I listened as he talked about her. And eventually there was a pause. Just a natural break in the conversation. For the first time in a while, there was space for someone other than him to speak. So I started talking. Earlier that day, something funny had happened at work. Nothing important. Nothing life-changing. Just one of those small stories people share with someone they love. The kind of story that isn't really about the event itself. It's about connection. It's about saying, here's a little piece of my day. That's all I was trying to do. I wasn't interrupting him. I wasn't changing the subject aggressively. I wasn't demanding attention. I was simply contributing to the conversation. Or at least I thought I was. A few seconds into my story, he interrupted me. He told me to lower my voice. At first, I assumed he was serious. Maybe I had gotten louder without realizing it. Maybe there were people nearby. Maybe I was talking too enthusiastically. So I looked around. There was nobody there. We were outside. No crowd, no strangers, no audience. No reason whatsoever to be concerned about volume. Confused, I asked whether I was speaking too loudly. It seemed like a reasonable question. I genuinely thought there must be some explanation. Then he answered. And with one sentence, everything changed. Just stop talking altogether. I remember feeling confused for a split second. Then he continued. You're embarrassing. You never have anything of value to add to the conversation. I don't think I've ever forgotten the exact wording. Some comments fade over time. That one didn't. Because it wasn't just an insult. It was a summary. A summary of everything I had secretly suspected he thought about me. The words landed with shocking force, because they confirmed something I had spent years trying not to believe. Suddenly, all those little moments made sense. All the times he seemed bored when I spoke. All the times he interrupted me. All the times he talked over me. All the times my stories seemed unimportant. All the times my opinions were dismissed. All the times he acted as though his thoughts mattered more than mine. For years, I had wondered whether I was imagining it, whether I was being overly sensitive, whether I was reading too much into things. Then he said those words, and suddenly there was no ambiguity left, because people don't accidentally tell their partner they have nothing valuable to contribute. That's not a misunderstanding. That's not poor communication. That's contempt, pure contempt. The strangest thing about the moment is that I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't list all the reasons he was wrong. I didn't point out how cruel the comment was. I didn't start a fight. I just stopped talking. Literally, the conversation ended. The walk continued. But I stopped talking, not because I agreed with him, not because I believed him, but because something inside me finally accepted the truth. I had spent years trying to earn respect from someone who didn't respect me. Years trying to be heard by someone who didn't care what I had to say. Years trying to convince myself that the relationship was healthier than it actually was. And in that moment, I was simply done. There was nothing left to discuss, nothing left to clarify, nothing left to fix. Because the problem wasn't that he had said something mean. The problem was that he meant it. Or at least he meant enough of it to say it out loud. People sometimes ask what finally makes someone leave a bad relationship. They imagine it must be some huge event. A dramatic betrayal, a scandal, a major crisis. Sometimes it's much smaller than that. Sometimes the final straw is simply hearing the truth. Not necessarily the truth about yourself, the truth about them. That comment told me more about him than it did about me. It revealed how he viewed me. It revealed how little respect remained. It revealed that he had become comfortable treating me with open disdain. And once I knew that, staying became impossible. The walk ended. The day ended. The relationship, although technically still alive, was already over. I just hadn't informed him yet. For the next several days, I thought about that conversation constantly. Not because I was questioning myself. Oddly enough, I wasn't. For the first time in years, I felt clarity. Painful clarity, but clarity nonetheless. I realized I didn't want to spend another year with someone who found me embarrassing. I didn't want to spend another month trying to impress someone who believed I had nothing valuable to say. I didn't want to spend another week hoping for respect from someone who clearly didn't respect me. So I ended it. The following week, I broke up with him. And honestly, by that point, the decision felt easy. The relationship itself had been hard. The years of self-doubt had been hard. The constant effort had been hard. Leaving was surprisingly simple, because once someone says, you never have anything of value to add to the conversation, there isn't much left to save. The relationship had already revealed its true form. Looking back now, I don't think that afternoon was the moment he started hating me. I think it was the moment he stopped hiding it. That's an important distinction. The signs had been there all along. I just wasn't ready to see them. For years, I had eaten every excuse, every criticism, every dismissal, and every little insult. I kept telling myself things would improve. I kept giving him chances. I kept hoping. What finally ended. It wasn't some grand betrayal. It was one brutally honest sentence. A sentence that confirmed every fear I had spent years trying to ignore. Ironically, it was also one of the greatest gifts he ever gave me. Because once he said it, I no longer had to wonder. I no longer had to analyze. I no longer had to guess. I knew. And knowing the truth set me free. The last thing I ever wanted was to spend my life shrinking myself for someone who couldn't see my value. The moment he told me I had nothing worth saying was the moment I realized I deserved someone who actually wanted to listen. And thankfully, I listened to myself instead. The day my grandma died, everything in me felt heavy and slow. Like the world was moving forward, but I was stuck in place. Funerals already have this strange feeling to them. Like time gets blurred, and you're just trying to do the next thing without fully understanding what's happening. I remember being surrounded by family and voices, and that quiet kind of grief that sits in your chest. Even after the service ended, I wasn't ready to just leave. I wanted to stand with my relatives a little longer, talk to them, listen to stories, hug people, and just be there. It wasn't about making the day longer on purpose. It was about holding on to the last piece of her that, I could still feel through the people who loved her. She was my grandma. That mattered. Even if our relationship wasn't perfect, or we didn't talk every day, she was still part of my life, part of my history, and part of my heart. But instead of giving me that space, he acted annoyed. Not quietly annoyed, like he was trying to hide it, but openly annoyed, like my grief was inconvenient. I remember him coming inside with this impatient energy and saying, "The kids are tired. Let's go now." The words themselves might sound normal if you don't know the moment, but it wasn't just the sentence. It was the tone. It was the way he delivered it, like I was wasting time, like I was being dramatic, like I was refusing to move on. I could feel my stomach drop because it wasn't like he pulled me aside gently and asked how I was doing or asked if I needed anything. He didn't come in with comfort. He came in with control. It felt like he was managing the schedule instead of caring about my heart. I remember trying to swallow the hurt because there were other people around. I didn't want to cry in front of everyone, and I didn't want to create a scene, but inside I felt this shock that was almost worse than the grief. I needed him to be soft with me in that moment. I needed him to put his hand on my back, to ask if I was okay, to let me lean on him. Instead, it felt like he was treating me like a problem to solve, and the solution was to rush me out the door. Later, when I finally told him how much it hurt me, I thought at least then he would understand. I explained it plainly. I told him that I needed comfort. I told him that he didn't support me during a painful moment. I told him that I felt alone, even though he was right there. And the way he responded was like he didn't even hear the emotional part. He looked at the situation like a debate, like something to win. He said, "Well, you weren't even that close to her." I still remember how cold that felt. Like he had reached into my grief and tried to measure it. Decide whether it was valid, decide whether I had earned the right to feel it. I wanted to scream, because who says that to someone who lost their grandma? It doesn't matter if we were close in the way he personally defines closeness. She was still my grandma. She was still family. She still mattered to me. Even if my relationship with her had been complicated or imperfect, the loss was real. The grief was real. And even if I had been not close, wouldn't that still be sad? Wouldn't that still be a reason to comfort your partner? Because the sadness can come from regret and longing too. But he didn't see any of that. He reduced it to something small and dismissible. That moment wasn't just painful because of what he said. It was painful because it made me realize how he saw me. It felt like he didn't respect my feelings unless they matched his logic. Like I had to justify my emotions, like I was in court. Like I had to prove my grief was big enough to deserve kindness. And it was a pattern. It wasn't a one-time mistake that he regretted later. It was part of who he was in the relationship. He didn't comfort me. He evaluated me. Over time, I started noticing this same imbalance in everything. He could put huge effort into the things he wanted, especially when it involved his friends. He would plan elaborate trips with them, make special gifts, go out of his way to show up for them in these thoughtful, intentional ways. He knew how to be creative. He knew how to be organized. He knew how to make people feel important. And if you only saw that side of him, you might think he was one of the most caring people in the world. But with me, it was different. With me, he acted like basic effort was a mystery. Like taking me on a date was something he couldn't understand, unless I gave him exact instructions. If I wanted him to do something sweet, I had to spell it out like a step-by-step manual. I had to make lists. I had to provide specific examples. I had to tell him exactly what by and how to do it. Even then, half the time he would still get it wrong, but then he'd expect praise for trying. He would look at me like I was supposed to clap for him, like he deserved a medal for doing the bare minimum. And if I didn't respond with excitement, If I didn't give him the kudos he wanted, he would act like I was ungrateful. It's hard to describe how draining that is, because on the surface it can look like small stuff. But it adds up. It makes you feel like you're always managing, always guiding, always teaching someone how to treat you like you matter. It makes you feel like love isn't something you receive naturally, but something you have to build yourself and then hand to the other person and hope they'll hold it correctly. It's exhausting. It also makes you start questioning yourself. You start wondering if you're asking for too much because they act like you are. You start lowering your expectations because they act like effort is difficult. But then you watch them turn around and do it easily for someone else. And you realize it's not that they can't. It's that they don't want to, not for you. He also had this habit of disappearing on me. Not in a dramatic movie way, but in a quiet, careless way that still cuts deep. He would go silent without communication, like it was normal to leave me wondering where he was or what was happening. No message, no heads up, no basic respect. Just gone, and I was expected to deal with the anxiety and confusion on my own. Then when he came back, it was like nothing happened. Like my worry didn't count. Like my time didn't count. Like I was supposed to be waiting on a shelf until he decided to come back and pick up the relationship again. By the end, the lack of effort wasn't subtle. It was obvious. It was in the way he showed up for everyone else and barely showed up for me. It was in the way he made me feel like a burden when I needed emotional support. But he expected me to be available whenever he needed something. It was in the way he dismissed my grief and minimized my feelings, but still expected me to be patient, caring, and understanding with him. And the more I noticed it, the harder it became to unsee it. That's why, even though I don't think he hated me, I also don't think he loved me in the way I deserved. It took me time to put that into words, because hate is easier to recognize. Hate looks obvious. Hate looks like yelling, cruelty, insults. But what I felt from him wasn't always obvious hate. It was something quieter. It was like he loved what I did for him more than he loved me. It was like he loved the role I played in his life, the comfort I provided, the way I carried the emotional weight, the way I supported him. He loved the benefits. He loved having someone. But he didn't seem to love me as a full human being, with my own needs, my own grief, my own limits. And then when I asked for a divorce, the moment that made me feel sick wasn't even anger. It was the way he cried and what he chose to say. Of all the things he could have cried about, of all the things he could have said, he looked at me with tears and said, "It's going to be so hard for me to imagine you having sex with someone else." That was what broke something in me completely, because it wasn't about losing me. It wasn't about missing my laugh, or regretting the ways he hurt me, or wishing he had been kinder, or realizing he took me for granted. It wasn't even about the family we built, or the life we shared. It was about his imagination, his ownership, his discomfort at the idea of me being with someone else. It reduced me to something physical, like I was an object he possessed, and was now losing. It made it feel like he saw me as a used object, something that belonged to him, something he didn't treat gently, but still didn't want anyone else to touch. That single sentence said more than he probably understood. It confirmed what I had been feeling. It confirmed that his love was centered around himself. Even his grief about losing me was really grief about losing access to me, losing control, losing the version of life where he benefited from my presence. In that moment, I felt this cold clarity. I realized that if the best he could do in the face of divorce was cry about his jealousy and possession, then he truly didn't understand me as a person. It's strange, because part of me did have compassion for him. I could see he was upset. I could see he was scared. But compassion doesn't erase the truth. And the truth was that he didn't show up for me in my hardest moments, like when my grandma died, when my grief needed softness, when my heart needed comfort. He didn't show up in the everyday moments either, the small chances to make me feel chosen, loved, valued. He showed up when it benefited him, and he checked out when it required emotional effort. By the time I reached the point of asking for a divorce, I wasn't doing it on impulse. It wasn't a sudden decision. It was the end of a long process of realizing I had been asking for basic kindness and still not receiving it. It was the end of trying to explain my feelings to someone who kept dismissing them. It was the end of watching him pour energy into his friends while I stood there, feeling like I needed to provide a list just to get a small amount of attention. And what made it even more painful was how normal I tried to make it for so long. I told myself he was just bad at gifts. I told myself he was just forgetful. I told myself he didn't realize how his words landed. I told myself he didn't mean it. I tried to translate his behavior into something softer so I could survive it. But grief doesn't lie. Loneliness doesn't lie. And the way I felt in that relationship, especially near the end, was lonely in a way that being physically alone would have actually been easier. Because being alone doesn't make you feel invisible. Being with someone who refuses to truly see you does. When I think back on it now, I don't just remember one moment or one comment. I remember a pattern of dismissal. I remember having to justify my emotions. I remember doing the emotional labor and getting nothing in return. I remember the sadness of watching him do thoughtful, intentional things for other people and realizing he understood exactly how effort works. He just didn't choose to apply it to me. And I remember the funeral day with this sharp clarity. Because that was a moment where love should have been simple. That was a moment where a partner doesn't need instructions or a list. You don't need a step-by-step guide to hold someone's hand. You don't need exact directions to say, I'm here, I'm sorry, take all the time you need. But instead, he brought impatience into a space that deserved tenderness. And then he tried to make me feel silly for being hurt by it. Even now, the part that still stings isn't just that he didn't comfort me. It's that he didn't seem to understand why comfort matters. Like love to him was practical and self-centered, and anything emotional was optional. But love isn't just the big moments or the physical part. Love is how you treat someone when they're hurting. Love is whether you show up when it's inconvenient. Love is whether you can put your ego aside long enough to be gentle. In the end, I didn't leave because I wanted something perfect. I left because I wanted something real. I wanted to feel like a person, not a tool. I wanted to feel supported, not measured. I wanted to be with someone who didn't need a checklist to care about me. Someone who didn't save their best effort for everyone else while I got the leftovers. I wanted to grieve my grandma without being rushed. I wanted to be loved in a way that did make me feel like I was there to serve a purpose. And when he cried and said what he said, it didn't make me doubt my decision. It made me feel sad for what I had tolerated. It made me realize I had been trying to earn something that should have been freely given. It made me see clearly that I wasn't losing a love that was nourishing. I was finally letting go of a dynamic that had been draining me. She was still my grandma. I still deserved comfort. I still deserved effort. And I still deserved to be seen as a human being. Not as something someone gets to own, use, and then complain about losing. We had been together for 6 or 7 years by that point, and, if I am being honest, things were already falling apart long before that day. Neither of us wanted to admit it out loud, but the relationship had been slowly drifting for a while. We were still together, still going through the motions, still showing up to the same events and making the same plans, but something had changed. The connection that once felt effortless had become strained. The conversations weren't the same. The excitement wasn't the same. The feeling of being understood wasn't the same. At the time, I thought we were simply going through a rough patch. Every long-term relationship has difficult periods. People get stressed. Life gets busy. Sometimes couples lose their rhythm for a while and then find their way back. I genuinely believed that was what was happening. I thought we were struggling, but recoverable. I thought if we communicated better, spent more time together, and worked through whatever was causing the distance between us, things would improve. I had no idea there would be one single moment that would completely destroy every remaining feeling I had for him. Not gradually, not over months, not after another year of arguments. Instantly, I can still remember exactly where we were. There was a free outdoor concert downtown. It was one of those evenings that should have been fun. The weather was nice. People were spread across the park enjoying the music, and the entire area had that relaxed atmosphere that comes with community events. For a little while, things felt normal. We stood together listening to the music. People were laughing, talking, and enjoying themselves. There was a hotel overlooking the park where the concert was being held. At some point, I happened to notice something in one of the windows. I don't even remember exactly what it was anymore. That's the strange thing. The actual thing I saw has completely faded from memory. What I remember is wanting to share it with him. It was one of those tiny moments that happen naturally when you're close to someone. You see something funny, unusual, or unexpected, and your first instinct is to point it out to the person standing next to you. Not because it's important, not because it's life-changing, just because sharing little moments is part of being connected to someone. So I leaned over toward him. The music was loud, obviously. We were at a concert. People were talking all around us, and the band was playing. I started explaining what I had noticed. I remember getting a sentence or two into the explanation. Then everything changed. Before I could finish, he leaned back and looked at me with this expression on his face that I can still picture years later. His face twisted into confusion and irritation. Then he said something that hit harder than any insult he had ever thrown at me before. 2TF are you even talking about? You're rambling about God knows what again. I'm surprised nobody has ever said that to you before. That was it. One sentence, one moment, one decision, and everything inside me changed. I remember standing there, feeling like I had just been punched. Not physically, emotionally. The kind of blow that takes a second to register. Because your brain almost doesn't want to believe it happened. The reality was simple. He hadn't heard me. The music was loud. I had been talking over a live concert. There was every possibility that he had simply missed part of what I said. A normal response would have been incredibly easy. What? I didn't catch that. Can you repeat it? What did you say? Any of those responses would have solved the problem instantly. Instead, he chose humiliation. Instead of asking for clarification, he decided to make a judgment about my intelligence. Instead of assuming he hadn't heard me properly, he assumed the problem was me. And not only me. According to him, apparently everyone else thought the same thing. That was the part that hurt most. Because while those weren't his exact words, that's exactly how they landed. When someone says, "I'm surprised nobody has ever told you that before," they aren't simply criticizing you. They're implying that everyone agrees. They're suggesting there is some secret consensus about you that you've somehow failed to notice. They're positioning themselves as the brave person, willing to finally say what everyone else supposedly thinks. It's an incredibly cruel thing to do. As he stood there looking annoyed, what I actually heard was something much bigger than the words he spoke. I heard, "Everyone you know thinks you're an idiot." People tolerate you, but they all notice this. They've talked about it. They laugh about it. You're the only one who doesn't know. Of course, none of that was actually true. At least I don't believe it was. But in that moment, that's exactly how it felt. It felt like he had taken every insecurity a person can have and wrapped them into one sentence. The fear of being annoying, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of not fitting in, the fear of people secretly judging you, the fear that everyone sees something wrong with you. He managed to trigger all of it in one careless comment. And the worst part, I don't even think he understood what he had done. To him, it was probably a throwaway remark, a moment of irritation, a sarcastic response, something forgotten 5 minutes later. For me, it became the moment the relationship died. People often assume relationships end during dramatic fights. They imagine screaming matches, cheating scandals, major betrayals, huge confrontations. Sometimes they do. But sometimes a relationship ends quietly. Sometimes it ends in a single sentence, a sentence that suddenly reveals how little respect exists underneath everything else. That's what happened to me. The second those words left his mouth, something switched off. I don't know how else to describe it. There wasn't a conscious decision. I didn't think I'm leaving him. I didn't create a plan. I didn't make an announcement. Something simply shut down. Every feeling I had spent years protecting disappeared. Every motivation I had to fix the relationship vanished. Every hope I had that we were just experiencing a rough patch evaporated. Because suddenly, I understood something important. A rough patch is when two people struggle but still care about each other. A rough patch is when communication gets messy. A rough patch is when life becomes difficult. What he revealed in that moment wasn't struggle. It was contempt. And contempt changes everything. Because once someone starts treating you with contempt, the relationship becomes almost impossible to save. Looking back, I don't think the comment itself was the entire issue. The deeper issue was what the comment revealed. It revealed that when he couldn't understand me, his first instinct wasn't curiosity. It wasn't kindness. It wasn't patience. It was ridicule. And that's a dangerous thing to discover about someone you've spent years loving. The concert continued after that. The music played. People laughed. The evening went on. But internally, I was gone. I don't remember much about the rest of that night. I only remember carrying that feeling home with me. The feeling that something fundamental had broken. And unlike previous arguments, I knew this wasn't something I could simply talk through. Because apologies can fix mistakes. Apologies can repair misunderstandings. Apologies can address bad moments. What they can't easily fix is the realization that someone views you with disrespect. Once you see that, you can't unsee it. More than 7 years have passed since that day. 7 years. That's a long time. Long enough for memories to fade. Long enough for anger to soften. Long enough for details to become blurry. But I still remember that moment clearly. Not because of the exact words, because of what they taught me. That experience fundamentally changed how I respond to people. There is one particular behavior I simply cannot tolerate anymore. The moment someone says something like, "Everybody thinks so. Everyone talks about it." People have been saying this. You know everybody notices it, right? I am done immediately. No discussion, no debate, no second chances, no explanation. Because I've learned exactly what that tactic is designed to do. It's designed to isolate you. It's designed to make you question yourself. It's designed to create the illusion that an entire group is secretly united against you. Whether it's true or not almost doesn't matter. The cruelty comes from the implication. The message is always the same. Everyone agrees that you're the problem. And honestly, I think that's one of the most vicious things a person can say. Not because it hurts in the moment, because it attacks a person's sense of belonging. Human beings are social creatures. Most of us want to feel accepted. Most of us want to feel understood. Most of us want to believe the people around us care about us. When someone suggests that an entire group secretly views you negatively, they're attacking that basic human need. That's why those comments cut so deeply. And that's why I refuse to tolerate them now. The older I get, the more I believe that people who truly care about you don't hide behind imaginary crowds. If someone has a concern, they express their own opinion. They don't recruit invisible supporters. They don't claim everyone agrees. They don't present themselves as the spokesperson for a secret committee. They speak for themselves. What happened at that concert taught me that difference. And while it ended my relationship, it also gave me one of the clearest boundaries I've ever developed. Because anyone who tries to make you feel like the whole world is laughing at you is not trying to help you. They're trying to hurt you. Maybe consciously, maybe unconsciously, but the goal is still the same. And in my experience, once someone reaches for that weapon, they've already revealed exactly how much respect they have for you. That man spent years believing we were working through a rough patch. I spent years believing it too. Then one sentence showed me the truth. The relationship wasn't ending because we had problems. It was ending because somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing me as someone worthy of kindness. And the moment I realized that, every remaining feeling I had for him disappeared forever. I have never regretted listening to that instinct. Not once. We were together for 6 years, which feels almost unbelievable when I look back now. 6 years is a long time to spend with someone. It's long enough to build routines together, create memories, talk about the future, and convince yourself that the problems you're seeing are temporary. It's also long enough to slowly normalize behavior that would seem absolutely ridiculous if you described it to an outsider. The relationship didn't start with giant flashing warning signs. Most unhealthy relationships don't. If they did, people would leave immediately. Instead, the problems tend to build gradually. One small thing becomes another small thing, and then another. You spend so much time adapting to the situation that you don't always realize how strange it has become until you're looking at it from a distance. When I think back on those 6 years, there are a handful of moments that stand out because they perfectly capture who he was and why the relationship eventually became impossible to continue. One of his favorite habits was correcting my tone. Not what I said, not the content of what I was saying, the tone. At first, it seemed like a communication issue. Everyone occasionally misunderstands someone else's mood or intent. I tried to be understanding about it, but over time I noticed a pattern. No matter how carefully I spoke, there was always something wrong with my tone. If I was frustrated, my tone was wrong. If I was excited, my tone was wrong. If I was tired, my tone was wrong. If I disagreed with him, my tone was definitely wrong. Sometimes I would spend more time defending the way I said something than discussing the actual issue I was trying to talk about. A simple conversation could suddenly become a debate about my attitude. A concern I wanted to raise would turn into an argument about my delivery. An opinion would become evidence that I was speaking incorrectly. It reached a point where I started monitoring myself constantly. I would think about every word before saying it. I would replay conversations afterward. I would wonder if maybe I had accidentally sounded rude. Looking back, I realized how exhausting that was. The goalposts constantly moved. There was no magical tone that would have satisfied him. Because the problem wasn't my tone in the first place. The problem was that correcting my tone allowed him to avoid addressing what I was actually saying. Another issue was gifts, or more accurately, the complete absence of them. And this wasn't really about money. I've received inexpensive gifts that meant the world to me because they showed thought and effort. A meaningful card, a favorite snack, flowers picked from a garden, a small item connected to an inside joke. Those things matter because they show someone is paying attention. But with him, there was nothing. Birthdays came and went. Anniversaries came and went. Special occasions came and went. And somehow there was always an excuse. For years I tried not to make a big deal out of it. I didn't want to seem materialistic. I didn't want to pressure him. I told myself everyone expresses love differently. Then, eventually, the truth came out. He admitted that he couldn't remember my birthday. Not only that, he couldn't remember our anniversary either. After 6 years together, 6 years, and somehow the situation got even worse. When I suggested putting those dates into his phone calendar, he refused. Not that he forgot to do it. Not that he intended to and never got around to it. He outright refused. That was the moment I realized it wasn't a memory problem. It was an effort problem. Because modern technology makes remembering important dates incredibly easy. You enter the information once and your phone does the rest. The refusal itself said everything. He wasn't interested in finding a solution. He simply didn't think it was important enough to bother. That realization hurt more than forgotten birthdays ever could. Then there were photographs, or rather, the lack of them. Most couples end up with photos together over the years. Vacations, holidays, family events, random moments at restaurants, walks, or celebrations. Even people who aren't obsessed with social media usually have pictures documenting important parts of their lives. Not us. He never wanted to take pictures with me. He never wanted to take pictures of me. If I asked, it felt like a chore, like I was requesting some enormous favor. At the time, I tried to tell myself he just wasn't a photo person. Some people genuinely don't enjoy being photographed. But then I noticed something. The issue wasn't photography. The issue was photography involving me. Because somehow photos of other things weren't a problem. Photos of events weren't a problem. Photos of hobbies weren't a problem. Photos of things he cared about weren't a problem. I simply wasn't something he felt interested in documenting. Years later, I realized how much that bothered me. Not because I needed constant pictures, but because everyone wants to feel seen. Everyone wants evidence that they mattered enough for someone to capture a moment. I look back now and realize there are entire years of our relationship that barely exist in photographs because he simply couldn't be bothered. Then there was my dog. My sweet, innocent dog somehow became one of his favorite subjects for ridicule. He loved telling people how stupid my dog was. Absolutely loved it. Friends would come over. Family members would visit. Conversations would happen. And somehow he would find a way to bring up how dumb my dog supposedly was. The strange part was that he was the reason the dog's training was inconsistent. I spent time training him. I worked on commands. I reinforced good habits. I followed routines. Then my boyfriend would completely ignore all of it. He wouldn't follow through. He wouldn't use the same commands. He wouldn't maintain consistency. He would undo training work and then laugh about the results. Imagine sabotaging a group project and then mocking the outcome. That's essentially what he was doing. At the time, it frustrated me because I loved my dog. Now I realize it was another example of a larger pattern. He enjoyed tearing things down. He enjoyed feeling superior, whether it was my concerns, my feelings, my dog, or my expectations. There always seemed to be satisfaction in finding something to criticize. The most unbelievable conversation we ever had involved marriage and children. For years, he talked about wanting kids. He liked discussing future plans. He liked imagining what life might look like. He liked the idea of being a father. What he didn't like was the idea of marrying me. One day he explained why, and somehow he managed to do it in writing, in an email. His reasoning was that if we got married, he would probably cheat on me. That was his argument. Not that he didn't believe in marriage, not that he wasn't ready, not that our relationship wasn't in the right place. His actual explanation was that marriage would somehow lead him to cheat. I remember reading it and feeling completely stunned. Even now, years later, I struggle to understand the logic. Most people avoid cheating because they respect their partner, because they value commitment, because they care about honesty. Apparently, his solution was simply to avoid marriage altogether, as though the institution itself was the problem, rather than his own behavior. What makes it even stranger is that he still wanted children. So according to him, creating human beings together was perfectly reasonable. Making a legal commitment to the person, raising those children with him, was where he drew the line. The mental gymnastics required for that position were genuinely impressive. At the time, I argued with him. I tried to understand him. I looked for deeper meaning. Now I realized the statement was incredibly simple. He was warning me about exactly who he was. I just wasn't ready to listen. And then we arrive at what might be the most bizarre moment in the entire relationship. The kitchen sink incident. Even now, I almost laugh when I tell the story because it sounds made up. For years, we argued about cleaning. Like many couples, household chores were a source of tension. I felt like I was carrying more responsibility than I should. He insisted things were fine. The conversations went nowhere. Then one day, I caught him peeing in the kitchen sink. The kitchen sink. Not a bathroom sink, not a toilet. The sink where dishes are washed. The sink used for food preparation and cleaning. The kitchen sink. For a moment, I genuinely thought I must be misunderstanding what I was seeing. Surely there had to be some explanation. There wasn't. That was exactly what was happening. And somehow he acted as though it wasn't a big deal. That moment became strangely symbolic for me, because by then, the relationship had deteriorated so badly that normal standards no longer seemed to exist. The person I was with had become someone I barely recognized. Or maybe he had always been that person. And I was finally seeing him clearly. By the final year, everything felt chaotic. The correction of my tone, the forgotten birthdays, the refusal to remember important dates, the lack of photographs, the constant criticism, the bizarre comments about marriage, the strange household behavior. It all combined into one giant realization. I was exhausted. Exhausted from explaining myself. Exhausted from lowering expectations. Exhausted from trying to build a future with someone who seemed determined to contribute as little effort as possible. The strangest part is that even with all of this, I still ended up being the one who had to end the relationship. People often assume the difficult partner eventually leaves. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they stay exactly where they are, because the situation works perfectly for them. They're comfortable. They're getting what they need. They're not motivated to change. Which means the healthier person eventually has to make the difficult decision. That's what happened to me. I was the one who finally ended it. I was the one who finally accepted that things weren't going to improve. I was the one who finally stopped waiting for a version of him that didn't exist. Ending it wasn't easy. 6 years is a long investment. You don't walk away without grief. You don't walk away without anger. You don't walk away without questioning yourself. But you do eventually reach a point where staying becomes harder than leaving. That was where I found myself. Today, when I think about that relationship, I don't wonder whether I made the right decision. The kitchen sink alone could probably answer that question. More importantly, I no longer spend my trying to understand behavior that was never reasonable in the first place. Some people enter your life to teach you what love looks like. Others enter your life to teach you what you should never tolerate again. He definitely belonged in the second category. And while I don't spend my days thinking about him anymore, I can honestly say I feel incredibly grateful that I eventually walked away, because the person I am now would never accept any of that behavior again. Not the criticism, not the neglect, not the excuses, and certainly not someone peeing in the kitchen sink while arguing about household responsibilities. Some memories age badly. That relationship aged like milk, and honestly, good riddance. When his sister passed away early in the year, it felt like the ground shifted under our whole life. Grief does that. It comes in fast. It changes the air in a room. It turns ordinary days into something heavy and confusing. I understood that he was going to be devastated, and I didn't try to rush him through it. I didn't expect him to be fine. I knew losing a sibling is the kind of pain that can make a person feel like they're walking around with an open wound, and I genuinely wanted to be there for him in every way I could. So I did what you do when you love someone and you see them falling apart. I tried to comfort him. I tried to ease the pain. I showed up in the ways that seemed obvious to me. I listened to him, even when he repeated the same thoughts over and over, because grief does that too. I let him talk about memories, about regrets, about how unfair it felt. I tried to keep our home as calm as possible so he could rest. I took on more of the day-to-day tasks without making him feel guilty, because I didn't want him to carry extra weight when he was already drowning. I tried to be gentle with him, patient with his moods, careful with my words. I gave him space when he needed it, and closeness when he reached for it. I did everything I could think of to make that time easier, because I believed that's what a marriage is supposed to look like when one person is hurting. But instead of the grief bringing him closer, it brought out something ugly in him. At first, it was small changes that I tried to excuse. A sharper tone here, a colder look there, more irritation, less gratitude. I kept telling myself he was just in pain. I kept telling myself grief can make people act out of character. I kept making room for him, giving him the benefit of the doubt, because I didn't want to be the person who gives up on someone during the worst moment of their life. The problem was that it didn't stop. It didn't soften over time. It didn't turn into healing. He just got meaner and meaner. It wasn't one bad day. It became a pattern. His grief didn't just make him sad. It made him cruel. He started taking things out on me like I was the safest target, like I was the person he could unload his anger onto without consequences. It felt like no matter how careful I was, I couldn't do anything right. If I tried to comfort him, he'd snap at me. If I gave him space, he'd act like I didn't care. If I tried to do something thoughtful, he'd find a way to twist it into something wrong. It was like I was constantly trying to read his mind, and I still failed every time. And that failure became his excuse to treat me badly. And then a few months later, life hit me with my own loss. I lost my job. It wasn't just a paycheck disappearing. It was my sense of stability, my routine, my confidence, my feeling of being useful in the world. I ended up unemployed for just shy of 8 months, and those months were already hard enough without someone tearing me down at home. I was scared. I was stressed. I was embarrassed. I was doing what I could, but unemployment can swallow you in a way people don't always understand. It's not just bills and job applications. It's waking up every day with a knot in your stomach, feeling like time is slipping away, feeling like you're failing even when you're trying. I needed support. I needed encouragement. I needed a partner who could remind me that I wasn't my worst moment, that I would get back on my feet, that we were a team. I needed someone who could say, I know this is hard, but we'll get through it. I didn't need perfection. I didn't even need him to have all the answers. I just needed him to not be my enemy in my own home. Instead, he made it his job to destroy me. He started telling me I was fat. He called me ugly. He called me lazy. He talked to me like I was worthless, like I was a burden he was stuck with. He used the time when I was already low to push me even lower. Like he wanted me to believe I deserved every bad thing happening to me. He didn't speak to me like a husband who loved me. He spoke to me like someone who wanted to crush any remaining self-esteem I had. And then he started saying things that cut deeper than insults. He told me he never actually loved me. Not in the middle of a heated argument where people say awful things they regret. He said it as if he wanted it to land and stay there, as if he wanted me to replay it in my head when I was alone. He said it like the goal was to make me question everything we had ever been, everything I had ever done for him, every sacrifice, every moment of closeness. It felt like he was rewriting our whole relationship in a way that made me the fool and him the victim. I was already depressed about my work situation. I was already fighting a mental battle every day to keep going, to keep applying, to keep believing I would find something, to keep believing I still had value, and then to turn around and realize that my husband hated me, really hated me. Felt like the final blow. It was like being kicked while I was already on the ground. I remember thinking that if the person who promised to love me could look at me with that kind of disgust, then what was even safe in my life anymore? The most confusing, twisted part was what he said about his sister. He claimed his hatred for me grew after she died, because I did nothing to help him. That statement felt unreal, because I knew what I had done. I knew how hard I had tried. I knew how much of myself I had poured into supporting him. I was there. I showed up. I carried extra weight. I tried to love him through his grief, and yet he looked at me and said I did nothing. It didn't just feel unfair. It felt like gaslighting, like he was trying to erase my reality and replace it with a story where he could blame me for his pain. It was as if he needed someone to carry the anger he felt about losing his sister. And he chose me because I was close and I was available, and he thought I wouldn't leave. He turned his grief into a weapon, and he used it to justify treating me like garbage. I started realizing that no amount of effort would ever satisfy him, because his problem wasn't that I wasn't helping. His problem was that he needed a place to put his rage. He needed to feel powerful when life had made him powerless. He needed someone to blame, because blaming a person feels easier than accepting that death is cruel and random and unfair. And so he picked me. And once he picked me, he didn't just stay angry. He built a whole identity around being wronged by me. Meanwhile, I was trying to survive. I was applying for jobs, dealing with rejection, dealing with the fear of what would happen if I couldn't find something soon. I was trying to keep myself from sinking deeper into depression. And instead of having a home that felt like a safe place, I had a home where I was constantly on edge. I never knew when he would lash out. I never knew what version of him I was going to get. I started feeling like I had to shrink myself just to avoid triggering him, but even shrinking wasn't enough. He would find reasons anyway. It was like I was living in a house where love had an expiration date. And once his sister died, he decided mine had run out. There's a specific kind of pain that comes from being insulted by a stranger. And then there's the deeper pain of being insulted by someone who knows exactly where to aim. He knew my insecurities. He knew what I was struggling with. He knew I was already hurting. And he chose words that would stick. because he wanted control. He wanted me to feel small, so he could feel bigger. He wanted me to doubt myself, so I wouldn't have the strength to challenge him. He wanted me to believe I was lucky he was even there, even while he treated me like I was unlovable. And the thing is, I didn't just feel sad. I felt humiliated. Because unemployment already makes you feel like you're falling behind in life, like everyone else is moving forward, and you're stuck. Add a partner who calls you lazy and ugly on top of that, and you start carrying shame that doesn't belong to you. You start questioning your worth in a way that becomes hard to undo. You start thinking maybe you really are disgusting. Maybe you really are a burden. Maybe you really are the reason everything is wrong. That's what constant emotional abuse does. It doesn't just hurt in the moment. It changes how you see yourself. I remember thinking, over and over, that I would never talk to someone I loved the way he talked to me. I would never look at someone who was struggling and decide to make their life harder, even if I was angry, even if I was stressed, even if I was grieving. Love to me still meant care. It still meant respect. It still meant basic human decency. But he acted like grief gave him permission to be cruel, and he acted like my unemployment gave him permission to treat me like I was nothing. The longer it went on, the more I realized the problem wasn't that he was grieving. The problem was that he was choosing to turn his grief into a license for abuse. Plenty of people grieve and still manage not to tear their partner apart. Plenty of people are devastated and still recognize the person who's trying to support them. Plenty of people lose someone and still keep their humanity. He didn't, and it became clear that he wasn't just unhappy. He was committed to blaming me for everything. If he felt pain, it was my fault. If he felt stressed, it was my fault. If he felt angry, it was my fault. And if I asked for kindness, I was too sensitive. If I defended myself, I was lazy or ungrateful. If I cried, he acted annoyed. It was like he wanted me to carry the emotional consequences of his life, so he didn't have to sit with them himself. I think that's why finding out he hated me felt like icing on the cake. Not because the job loss wasn't enough, but because it came at a moment when I had nothing left to give. I was already running on fumes. I was already trying to survive each day. And the person who was supposed to be my partner, my teammate, my support system, turned into another source of pain. It felt like the world was closing in from all sides. Felt like I couldn't breathe. There's something deeply disturbing about realizing that someone can accept your care when they need it, but then punish you when you need care back. I had done everything imaginable for him after his sister died, and he still decided the story was that I did nothing. Then when I was the one in crisis, he didn't step up. He stepped on me. That kind of imbalance makes you feel like love was never the point. Like the relationship was built around one person being served and the other person being used. And the longer I sat with it, the clearer it became that I didn't just feel unloved. I felt dehumanized, like I wasn't seen as a full person with struggles and feelings, but as an object that was either useful or useless. When I was useful, when I was comforting him, caring for him, holding him up, he took it. When I became someone who needed support, he punished me for it. That's not love. That's not partnership. That's control and cruelty wrapped up in excuses. Looking back, I wish I could go back to that version of myself and tell her the truth sooner. I wish I could tell her that being unemployed doesn't make you lazy. That depression doesn't make you worthless. That gaining weight or struggling with self-image doesn't make you unlovable. That no job, no body, no difficult season turns you into someone who deserves to be insulted. I wish I could tell her that the way he spoke was not a reflection of her value, but a reflection of his own ugliness and his need to take his pain out on someone else. Because the truth is, I did help him. I did show up. I did try. And even if I hadn't done everything perfectly, nothing justifies the way he treated me. Nothing justifies calling your partner fat, ugly, and lazy. Nothing justifies saying you never loved them as a way to hurt them. Nothing justifies turning grief into a weapon and rewriting history to make yourself the victim. While the other person is broken down piece by piece. The hardest part was realizing that the person I thought would protect me was the person I needed protection from. I thought marriage meant being safe with each other. I thought it meant that when life knocks one of you down, the other reaches out a hand. But instead, when life knocked me down, he used it as an opportunity to push my face closer to the ground. And that's the kind of moment that changes you. It teaches you that love isn't just about the good times. It's about who someone becomes when things get hard. It's about whether they still treat you with dignity when you're vulnerable. It's about whether they see you as a human being or as a punching bag. In that season, I was already losing my footing. Losing my job shook my confidence and my sense of security. But learning that my husband's feelings had turned into hatred, and hearing him say he never loved me, and having him blame me for his sister's death in this twisted way, made me feel like I was losing my reality too. Like nothing I did mattered, like even love could be erased and replaced with cruelty if it suited him. It was devastating, but it was also clarifying, because it showed me the truth of the relationship in a way I couldn't ignore. It showed me that I could give everything and still be blamed for not doing enough. It showed me that he wasn't interested in fairness, gratitude, or partnership. He was interested in having someone to take things out on, someone to control, someone to make smaller so he could feel bigger. And I didn't deserve that. Not in grief, not in unemployment, not ever. If anything, that time proved what kind of person I was. I showed up for him in his worst pain. I tried to ease it. I tried to love him through something awful. And when I was struggling, he chose cruelty. That difference matters. It says everything about who he is and who I am. And even though it hurt like hell, it also made it impossible to pretend anymore. It made it clear that I wasn't failing him. He was failing me. If you've stayed with me this far, then these stories didn't simply pass the time. They stayed with you. Everything you heard tonight was real. Real people. Real moments. And in each one, something quietly slipped out of place. If you'd like more of the kind that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Crowvane Manor. There are more rooms left open, and more stories waiting behind every door. I'm grateful you spent this part of your night here. Rest well, and I'll be waiting when you return.